The world has held its breath before, but never like this. Tonight, we're not talking about distant tensions or cold headlines. We're talking about a moment that could reshape the global order as we know it. Iran and Israel, locked in a clash that has drawn in the giants, the United States and China. This isn't just a regional dispute anymore. It's a global crisis unfolding before our eyes. Missiles in the skies, warships on the move, alliances activating. And behind every political decision, millions of innocent lives hanging in the balance. You're about to hear the full picture, unfiltered and raw, the kind of truth they don't show you on the evening news. So sit back, open your mind, and stay with me until the very end, because what's coming next will not only shock you, it will change the way you see the world forever. The tipping point in any conflict doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it's a silent moment, a crossing of a line too bold to ignore. The Iran-Israel conflict has long simmered beneath the global surface, marked by proxy wars, cyber attacks, espionage, and diplomatic hostilities. But this time, the pattern of provocation met retaliation in a way that cracked open the floodgates. A single missile, a targeted strike, a death that couldn't be swept under the rug. That was the moment the old rules collapsed. What followed wasn't just another chapter in a long regional rivalry. It was the ignition of something far more dangerous. The world had seen this powder keg being built for decades, agreements abandoned, red lines crossed, and shadow wars fought in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Gaza. Each step brought them closer to the edge. And then they stepped off it. This tipping point didn't happen in isolation. It was the culmination of layered events, assassinations, military drills disguised as exercises, economic sanctions that choked a nation's breath, and years of demonization through media and policy. A strike on a key installation, or perhaps a convoy intercepted on foreign soil, became more than an attack. It was interpreted as a declaration of war. No longer was this a conflict operating in shadows. It had emerged into the daylight, full of fire and fury. Iran responded not with hesitation, but with overwhelming retaliation. Israel, known for swift, powerful replies, unleashed its own force. Neither side flinched. And that is what made this moment different. The usual back-channel messages didn't arrive. The UN statements didn't matter. The missiles flew anyway. In that ignition, the regional players turned into global pawns. Superpowers started to position themselves not to prevent war, but to shape its direction. The U.S. reinforced its bases, calling in allies. China moved warships and spoke words heavy with implication. Russia began watching closely. Europe froze in hesitation. The Middle East, already fractured, began choosing sides. No one wanted to blink first, and so the eyes of the world stayed wide open. The tipping point didn't just escalate a fight, it changed the arena. The battlefield was now global. The line between local and international had dissolved. Civilians found themselves at the mercy of powers they would never meet. And with every passing hour, the flames rose higher. What sparked in the heart of the Middle East now threatened to consume the peace of the world. The involvement of the United States and China in the spiraling Iran-Israel conflict signals a dangerous evolution from a regional crisis to a global standoff. For decades, the U.S. has stood firmly as Israel's unwavering ally, not just diplomatically, but militarily and financially. Billions in aid, shared intelligence, and joint defense systems like the Iron Dome have made this bond more than just political, it's strategic. Any threat to Israel is, in many ways, seen as a threat to American interests. So, when Iran's retaliation intensified and Israel responded with overwhelming force, the U.S. couldn't stay on the sidelines. Military bases across the Middle East were put on high alert. Aircraft carriers moved into the Gulf. Diplomats issued statements, but soldiers were already preparing for something far beyond diplomacy. The red line had been crossed, and America had to act, not just to protect Israel, but to preserve its dominance in the region. On the other hand, China, a rising global power with vast interests in Middle Eastern oil and trade routes, could not afford to let the situation escalate without a response. But unlike the U.S., China's approach has been strategic patience, soft power, and economic influence. China has massive investments across Iran through its Belt and Road Initiative. It has also strengthened its ties with other key players in the region, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE. When war breaks out in the Middle East, China's energy supplies, trade routes, and geopolitical influence are all at risk. So as missiles flew and alliances hardened, China made its move. Not through direct military intervention, but through calculated naval deployments, strategic partnerships, and intelligence cooperation. Its entry wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. China doesn't want war, but it won't allow the U.S. to reshape the Middle East unchallenged. The simultaneous involvement of these two giants has placed the world on the edge of a geopolitical fault line. This is no longer just about Iran and Israel. It's about influence, power, and global dominance. The Middle East, once a battleground for ideologies and resources, is now the stage for a potential confrontation between East and West. Every missile launched, every airstrike returned, carries with it the possibility of triggering a wider war. The presence of the U.S. and China has not calmed the storm. It has made the stakes higher. Every move is now watched with suspicion. Every action carries global weight. The question is no longer whether the conflict will escalate. It's who will control its outcome. Iran's expanding influence through proxy networks has been one of the most underreported yet powerful dynamics in the Middle East shifting balance of power. These alliances aren't just temporary arrangements. They are deeply rooted in ideology, resistance, and shared strategic goals. At the heart of this network are groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. Each of them plays a distinct role, but all act under the umbrella of Iran's broader vision to resist Western dominance and challenge Israeli and U.S. interests in the region. These proxies are not rogue elements. They are highly trained, well-funded, and often equipped with sophisticated weaponry, supplied either directly or indirectly by Iran. Their loyalty isn't bought by money alone. It's forged through years of political, religious, and military alignment. This gives Iran the unique ability to wage asymmetrical warfare without directly involving its own troops. In the recent escalation with Israel, these networks have proven to be a strategic advantage. As soon as the first wave of Iranian missiles was fired, allied groups across the region began mobilizing. Rockets launched from southern Lebanon by Hezbollah, drone attacks traced to Houthi territory in Yemen, and militia activity near U.S. bases in Iraq all occurred within hours of each other. This kind of coordination doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of long-term planning and shared intelligence. The effect is overwhelming. Israel and its allies are suddenly forced to fight on multiple fronts, stretching their defense systems thin and creating confusion about where the next strike will come from. It's a storm of attacks, and at the eye of that storm sits Iran, not acting openly but orchestrating everything with precision and patience. This proxy network is more than a military asset. It's a psychological weapon. It creates uncertainty and fear among opposing nations. It complicates diplomatic efforts because leaders can't simply negotiate with Tehran alone. They must now consider a web of actors, each with their own goals and capacities. And unlike conventional armies, these groups blend into civilian populations, making retaliation risky and morally complex. The world has underestimated the depth and reach of Iran's alliances. These aren't just pawns on a board. They are strategic pieces with their own autonomy and power to ignite chaos. What makes this more dangerous is the fact that these groups are deeply embedded in the socio-political structures of their countries. Destroying them would mean destabilizing entire nations, something the international community is reluctant to do. As the war spirals further out of control, the importance of these proxies will only grow. They give Iran leverage without exposing it to full-blown invasion. They allow Tehran to maintain deniability while still exerting devastating influence. And in a conflict where every action is scrutinized on the world stage, Iran's ability to operate through others may prove to be its greatest strategic asset. It's not just a war of missiles anymore. It's a war of networks, and Iran's network is awake, active, and expanding. The involvement of global powers like the United States and China in the spiraling Iran-Israel conflict signals a dangerous escalation that could transform a regional struggle into a full-scale international crisis. The United States has long maintained a deep strategic alliance with Israel, providing military aid, diplomatic backing, and intelligence support. Its naval presence in the Persian Gulf and military bases scattered throughout the Middle East allow it to respond rapidly to any perceived threat against Israel or its own interests in the region. So, when Iranian missiles began raining down and proxies ignited conflict across multiple fronts, the U.S. had little choice but to respond, first with statements of support, then with aircraft carriers moving into position, and eventually with limited strikes designed to contain the situation. But the complication arises when China enters the picture. Unlike the U.S., China doesn't maintain a strong military presence in the Middle East. Its interest in the region is primarily economic, particularly its dependence on oil imports from Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the broader Gulf. China has been working quietly behind the scenes in recent years to broker peace and balance relations between Iran and other players like Saudi Arabia. So when the war escalates to a level that threatens oil supplies and destabilizes energy markets, China is forced to abandon its quiet diplomacy and take a more assertive role. The result is unprecedented. Two rival superpowers, each with deep but differing interests, now pulled into a regional war neither of them wanted. This shift puts enormous pressure on the global political stage. The UN Security Council becomes paralyzed, with the US and China backing different resolutions, unable to find common ground. Global markets react violently, oil prices spike, shipping routes become high-risk zones. Nations that rely on Middle Eastern oil start looking for alternatives or begin tapping into reserves. Meanwhile, military assets are repositioned, warships move into contested waters, and intelligence operations intensify. Every move is being watched, every signal scrutinized. But this isn't just about military alliances or economic interests. It's about the fragile nature of world order. The fact that two global giants now stand on opposite ends of a regional conflict means that any misstep, any accidental strike, or misinterpreted message could spiral into something even more catastrophic. The world watches as diplomatic hotlines heat up, as allies question commitments, and as rivals eye the shifting balance of power. This fourth key point reveals a terrifying truth. Once global powers enter the equation, the war is no longer just about Iran and Israel. It becomes a reflection of the broader tensions that exist between East and West, between NATO and its challengers, between a world trying to preserve the old order and one that is already ushering in the new. This isn't just a geopolitical chess game anymore. It's a countdown to whether diplomacy will prevail or whether global miscalculation will light a fire the world may not be able to put out. The fifth keynote centers on how the war's escalation has shattered global markets and created a ripple effect that touches nearly every household on the planet. As soon as Iran and Israel exchanged heavy missile fire and the Houthis and other proxies joined the chaos, the oil markets reacted with a spike not seen since the early 2010s. Brent crude shot past $120.00 a barrel within days. Energy traders panicked. Shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital choke point through which 1/5 of the world's oil passes, saw insurance rates quadruple, and major companies began pulling tankers from the route entirely. It wasn't just an oil crisis. It became a full-blown energy shock. As the war persisted and uncertainty loomed, countries heavily reliant on Middle Eastern oil, especially developing nations, found themselves caught in a crisis they didn't provoke. Inflation surged. Fuel prices at the pump doubled in some parts of the world. Gasoline, heating oil, electricity, everything became more expensive. Supply chains that were just recovering from the pandemic disruptions were now hammered again as freight costs soared and cargo ships rerouted. Airlines hiked ticket prices. Trucking companies struggled. Grocery store shelves started looking emptier in some regions. The war, thousands of miles away, had walked into people's homes through their energy bills and grocery receipts. But oil wasn't the only sector bleeding. Global stock markets tumbled as investor confidence vanished. Tech stocks, which had already been volatile, took a hit. Currencies of smaller economies depreciated rapidly, and central banks around the world were forced into emergency meetings. Some raised interest rates to control inflation, while others warned of possible recessions. The war had morphed into a global economic contagion, and no nation, rich or poor, could claim immunity. Then came the gold rush. Figuratively and literally, investors scrambled for safe havens. Gold prices reached record highs. Crypto markets experienced wild fluctuations, and real estate in certain neutral countries saw spikes as wealthy elites tried to move capital to safer zones. The panic wasn't just in boardrooms or trading floors. It spread into the hearts of ordinary people as headlines screamed of food shortages, gas rationing, and collapsing currencies. What makes this economic fallout particularly alarming is the unpredictability. War is rarely neat, and with each passing day, the conflict introduces new variables, more proxies, more fronts, and possibly more state actors. Markets hate uncertainty, and this war delivered it in abundance. Economic forecasts are thrown into chaos. Even optimistic scenarios hinge on fragile assumptions that the fighting can be contained, that diplomacy will eventually prevail, or that energy reserves will suffice. But in the real world, none of that is guaranteed. The fifth key point illustrates the true cost of modern warfare in a globally connected system. A regional war may start with missiles and drones, but its shockwaves ripple into global commerce, fuel tanks, stock portfolios, and dinner tables. In a matter of weeks, the economic map of the world began to redraw itself. And for millions, survival became more about weathering the economic storm than the missiles flying overhead. The sixth keynote focuses on the deep emotional and psychological toll this escalating war is having on ordinary people across the globe. While governments speak in statements and strategies, while leaders argue in press conferences and parliaments, It is the people, families, children, workers, students, who are carrying the burden in silence. In cities like Tehran, Tel Aviv, Sana'a, and even New York or London, there's a growing sense of fear, confusion, and helplessness that no speech or policy can ease. People wake up checking their phones, not for the weather or messages, but for news of the next strike, the next retaliation, the next country being dragged into war. Anxiety has become the world's new currency. In Gaza, the streets are no longer places for children to play. They are corridors of survival. In Iran, while some chant in support, others brace for air raids and economic collapse. In Israel, the fear of incoming missiles is real and constant, with sirens replacing lullabies. But beyond the Middle East, the emotional toll spreads farther than one might expect. Muslim communities in the West face rising hate crimes, accused of standing with violence simply for existing. Jewish families experience the same scrutiny, with synagogues under surveillance and fear becoming a quiet companion to worship. Social media, instead of being a place for connection, has turned into a war zone of its own. People weaponize narratives, misinformation circulates like wildfire, and everyone seems to be choosing sides without knowing the full story. The constant exposure to trauma, videos of destruction, screaming children, broken parents, devastated hospitals, is leaving people emotionally paralyzed. Mental health professionals have started reporting an increase in PTSD symptoms in people who aren't even in war zones. Empathy fatigue is setting in. People want to care, but the suffering is so widespread and intense that it overwhelms their capacity to feel. For many, especially the youth, this moment is shaping how they see the world and their place in it. Some feel inspired to fight injustice, to speak out, to donate, to march. But others feel numb, questioning whether there's any hope left in humanity. Trust in governments is eroding, faith in international law is dwindling, and the sense of unity that once defined human tragedies, like during the early COVID days, is now replaced with division, confusion, and apathy. This emotional collapse isn't just a consequence of war, it's a weapon of war. When people lose hope, when they start believing that suffering is normal, when they turn away from the pain because it's too heavy to hold, then something far more dangerous happens. Humanity starts to die quietly. And this war, beyond the missiles and tanks, is aiming straight at the soul of our collective consciousness. Whether we survive it as a civilization won't just depend on the weapons used or the alliances formed, but on whether ordinary people still choose to feel, to care, to stand up for what's right, even when the world seems determined to fall apart. As the dust rises from the deserts and the oceans ripple with the weight of moving warships, one truth remains undeniable. This is no longer just about Iran and Israel. It's about the balance of power in a world already standing on a fragile edge. It's about the lives of everyday people caught in the fire of decisions they never made. And it's about whether humanity still remembers its duty to truth, justice, and peace when chaos demands otherwise. We've seen alliances activate, powers collide, and emotions erupt. But now comes the real test, not of military might, but of moral strength. The world must decide, will we keep fueling the fire, or will we finally choose to put it out before it consumes us all? To everyone who stayed with us through this journey, thank you. May you carry this truth forward, speak it boldly, and never forget the power you hold by simply caring. Stay aware, stay brave, and may you always walk on the side of justice, no matter how dark the road may seem. Good luck, and may peace be your constant companion.